now I'm going to switch to the second part of my talk, which is about my research. And what I'm trying to do in this part is just focus on my research. I'll talk to a little bit about the teaching later, but I want to show you through my own life the different types of research that are possible by a foreign scholar. And I think what I'm trying to show is the position, the stage 4 that I'm at now, is as close as I can come to answering what is the value of an American scholar in the Japanese Academy. Okay. So stage 1 of my research, and there's in the packet here, there's the cover page and the table of contents for my first book. So this was for my first book. It was published, I think, in 2007. And it was entitled Exploring Cross-National Attraction in Education. And the question that I was really trying to answer is this one here. Why is it that particular countries become interested in the educational systems of particular other countries at certain times? So this topic comes from two sources, as do I think all of our topics. One is personal, and one is kind of the field, how the field is structured. So my personal interest in this was that I remember when I was very young as an American that we were very much excited about Japanese education. As an American in 80 nendai, everyone was like, oh, Japanese education is the best. The best. Then I came in 2003 to teach English. And the classroom was like 動物園みたい。工業高校、田舎の工業高校で、and everyone said 学力低下。Everything's falling apart. Japanese education's no good. So I was interested in kind of images of other educational systems from the very beginning. Now, in terms of the field, one of the big themes in UK comparative education is the theme of policy borrowing or policy transfer. So there have been these books, Educational Policy Borrowing, The Global Politics of Educational Borrowing and Lending. This was in 2004. And 2012, World Yearbook of Education, Policy Borrowing and Lending in Education. Basically, the idea is that in the past, educational policies usually came from kokunai forces. But with the advent of globalization now, you're getting policies transferred from one country to the next. So in the 1980s, that was in the United States trying to catch up with Japan's education, was kind of the first wave. But now it's become very, very much professionalized. So OECD is saying, oh, this is what Singapore does. This is what Shanghai does. So you should do this, and your PISA scores will rise. So this is all about borrowing and transfer of policy. So it's a one dimension of globalization. And my supervisor at Oxford, David Phillips, is a quite well-known name in the field of UK comparative education. And he developed this kind of heuristic device called the 4 stages of policy borrowing. When I started the master's program, he handed it to me. If you want to study transfer, you want to study these types of things, dozo. So basically, I won't go into it very much, but stage one is kind of cross-national attraction. Why do countries become interested in other countries? Then two, why is the decision made to borrow a policy or to take a policy from another country? Three, when it's implemented, what happens to that policy? How is it adapted? How is it changed in the context? Right? For example, I mean, there's so many examples of this in Japan, right? It's this kind of selective interpretation, selective implementation of ideas. For example, これからの active learning. Maybe it's from progressive education, 子ども中心主義, but immediately it says in groups. So it's a very different approach in a way to active learning in other places. And then what happens to these policies? Do they actually get internalized? Does anything actually change in the gemba, in the places? So it was a way to understand and kind of classify all of these different studies that have taken place over time around policy borrowing. So the purpose of my study was then to focus on this cross-national attraction stage. So it was a very simple setup. This was actually my master's thesis. And what I was trying to understand is, how did America understand or think about Japanese education over a long span of time? And how did China, over the same span of time, think about Japanese education? And why that research design was interesting was because if the times of high interest in Japanese education was different, then it very clearly showed that there were different domestic criteria for good education, and there was oscillations from time to time. Maybe that's very obvious to you, but there's a theory, which I will talk about in a moment, a theory made in America that says that everyone is converging on a single model of education. So that's world culture theory. So this was just a very modest attempt to discuss kind of the politics behind cross-national attraction. Now, one of the problems with this study was that I actually didn't focus very much on Japanese education itself. Now that sounds strange, but what I was trying to do was to understand how America understands Japanese education. So I used policy texts, scholars, and media reports from the United States to understand what kind of images, what kind of stereotypes were being kind of passed off as Japanese. And then compare those versus China. What types of things was China interested in? A very simple example would be America was not interested in vocational education, but China was very interested in that. Okay? Also, America at the time of Reagan was very interested in Japan spent so little on its GDP, spends very little of GDP money on education. So they were going to use it as an excuse for neoliberal reforms. Okay? So it was just a very simple attempt in a short master's course to understand the basic ideas. But as I said, I went on to my PhD, and I had a lucky occasion to meet Kariya sensei in a pub. And I also was interested in kind of developing further my understanding of Japan itself. Coming back to Todai gave me the chance to improve my Japanese, and also gave me the chance to interact with Kariya sensei and other scholars to understand what was really happening in Japan, not the outside images of Japan.